Hello, everybody. This is Fernando for the latest Godzilla podcast. Alright, this is part 3, and this should be the last part with regards to talking about the what could have been, this being the Godzilla sequel, the American version, or the American production of the Godzilla 2000 film. So, a sequel to that Godzilla 2000 film on there. And last we had left off talking about Godzilla and the reason why he was stomping towards the island in Hawaii, which was to meet this monster, this Maiba monster. Again, this Maiba monster would have been a giant bat-like creature that was made of molten lava. Very, very fascinating to wonder on what could have been with this particular creation. Because again, the special effects would have been much better than the Japanese version. Probably not quite as good as the American versions on any of the American productions, but it still would have definitely passed flying colors considering the increased budget that it would have had. I imagine there would have been a lot of CGI with the practical mixed effects with a creature made of molten lava, so it would have been very, very cool to see something like that. So that's how the script goes. Godzilla would have met this giant molten creature, and they would have fought, and they would have battled throughout the island itself. Most of the action would have taken place, if not the entire movie, just in this one location on the island in Hawaii. So no flashbacks to Japan, or no flashbacks to any parts of the U.S. coastal land. No, it would have just all taken place in Hawaii on there. So fascinating how the script would have kept everything on a global sense, but just having it be just this one particular spot that they focused on. So with regards to the lead characters, Michael said that Michael, again being the writer of this particular script, he said that he actually had some actors in mind. He wrote these characters in his script with some actors in mind on here. And to give you a good example, he was wanting to cast people that he thought definitely fit certain genres. Like, he wanted to have Bruce Campbell within the film. He wanted to have Jamie Lee Curtis. He wanted to have Scott Bakula. He wanted to have Christopher Lee, famous, of course, for the Lord of the Rings films and the Star Wars films. He wanted to have Leonard Nimoy, Mr. Spock himself, in there too. And he wanted to have Bob Picardo. So if you don't know who that is on there, he is the Star Trek Voyager doctor that was in that series on there. And so he was writing these parts specifically with them in mind, no doubt as a way to pitch to them, hey, how would you like to be in a somewhat big budget version of another Godzilla film? And that way they could have said yes on that part on there. Now let's talk about what happened to the script, and then essentially why it was essentially canceled, and why we never heard any of this production up until today. One part of the reason is Godzilla, that Toho did not like what happened to Godzilla on there, and to show you essentially how early this particular production was stopped. While Toho did read the script, there was actually nothing involved in terms of pre-production. So no concept art exists of this work, no animatics exists either, no storyboards, nothing like that. All we have is the spec script itself, and even then I don't think that was even a full-blown script at all, rather just, again, a couple of 20 pages or so combining the ideas that would have made this film. So no drawings, nothing that we can base any of the information on here. That's how early this particular thing was canceled. So when Toho read the script, the one thing they didn't like was the fact that Godzilla was actually going to be killed halfway through the film, and he wasn't going to be killed by the monster. Rather, he would have been killed by the army. So it's interesting, the U.S. Army. So it's interesting to think that with all the flack that the Godzilla 1998 film got, with Godzilla essentially being killed by the U.S. Army at the end of the movie, and Michael again writing the Godzilla 2000 version on the U.S. side, how he would have incorporated that again within the film itself. Toho didn't like that, and they also didn't like the fact that the way Godzilla would have been resurrected, I guess that's where it comes with the title being Godzilla Reborn, is he would have been cloned. He would have been cloned after a halfway point within the film. And that's where he would have fought that monster Maiba on there. So, interesting. Again, Toho, they liked the script, they just didn't like those two things on there. And so Michael said he was going to change it, so that way he could ensure that even going forward with this film, it does get Toho's approval on there. Now, as far as the studios, Sony studio on there, apparently the Columbia TriStar, the reason why they decided not to go forward on this is because they got a whole new chief right around that time. Apparently they had a new head of production, and this head of production, who goes by the name, in the article it says Sid Yanis, he actually came on board as a producer on that film, but in a weird sort of way. He came on board as a producer, but he wouldn't even read the script itself, which is weird. How can you be a producer of a film but not even bother reading the script on there? So they couldn't get him interested. Maybe because he was the head of production, he was essentially producer on all films. That's why his name shows up on there. But he could not be bothered to read the script at all. The way he said it was, this head of production, Sid, said, "I'm in the Spider-Man business now. $20 million movies aren't on my radar." That's his exact quote, by the way. So it gives you an idea of how little he thought of this project on there. So while you have Mike, the writer, and then Joe Dante, the director, all on board eagerly to make a production like this, here you have a new person on board, a very powerful person, the one that can decide yay or nay on these things, and he was not interested on there. So that came to a halt. And then Mike noted in the article that had this movie instead, because he was referring again, I'm in the Spider-Man business, so if this movie instead, if it would have had a budget of $100 million or plus or so, then it would have caught his interest. But again, doing that would have also potentially negated the option of the movie even being made, because then it would have been too expensive. So it's a catch-22 situation on there. And then Sony, which again owns Columbia TriStar, they basically stated by that point they just wrote it off. The Godzilla sequel to the 1998 film, Sony had a 5-year benchmark to make a sequel for that, but they said no. They just pretty much let that license expire on its own. And interestingly enough, Sony paid Toho in advance $5 million for the rights of the 1998 sequel, and because they just let it lapse, they ate that money. So $5 million, poof, it's down the drain. It's gone on there. And on top of that, Sony was saying, so they didn't want to make the 1998 sequel, and Sony Columbia didn't also want to make this one now, because it wasn't too big enough. So very, very interesting, again, the dilemma that they're caught with. If they make the movie too big, Sony will say no. They'll be interested, and they'll take a look, far more than this $20 million picture, but they would have said no. And then if they made the film too small, like they were going with at that point, then Sony was not even bothering or caring about it. So interesting stuff, the way that they were caught in that situation. And so Michael and Joe Dante, they shopped it to other studios. They shopped it to other places. The article doesn't say who, but I would imagine it would have been some of the other big studios like Warner Brothers, Universal, and so forth. But Toho kind of stuck them, kind of shot themselves in the foot, because anytime they wanted, a studio wanted a potential deal on a future Godzilla film, Toho insisted on a huge amount of money up front in order for it to get done, and that pretty much killed the deal anywhere else. No studio was going to be interested in having this done without Toho taking away from that particular demand on there. So that's where the deal died. So again, you had Columbia, Sony not really wanting to work on this because the movie's too small, and then not really wanting to work on the 1998 sequel because of all the flack they got. And then you have Toho kind of ruining things because they wanted a huge amount of money up front to shop this around, and the studios were saying no. I wonder then how the Warner Brothers deal came about with Legendary Pictures. I imagine that there's probably a back-end deal of some sort rather than an upfront deal, because again, that Godzilla 2014 film took years to make, and I imagine that they fell into one of those categories. So interesting stuff. So with that, the Godzilla Reborn sequel was dead, and that was it. So again, if you have a chance, check out the link below. You'll read the whole story. You'll read all his quotes from Michael, the writer of this Godzilla Reborn sequel. Again, a huge surprise to find out that within the Godzilla franchise and all the could-have-beens that have been in the past, especially the American versions of films, how this one was lost in there somewhere. But it's so cool to talk about that here and share that with everybody. So alright, thanks everybody as always. Take care. Bye.